How you doing? I'm Thomas Nyback. This is 365 Days Toward Racial Change. This is day 356. We are on the countdown to racial change at this point. Pleasure to be with you again. And, as we wind this project up, we are talking about maybe some housekeeping. I got to go back and rework some stuff. Intend to get a website going so that there's some links to maybe redirect you to the website. I didn't want to put my personal contact information here. I feel like maybe if you click one more and get redirected, you may find some other interesting things. But that has not happened yet. I'm just brainstorming. Would love to see your suggestions in the comments as I go back over these now. I just wanted to lay a big foundation with videos and some text, and just go from there. Nothing. There's no real fixed standard that I came to this with a year and a half ago. So we're just flying by the seat of our pants, and as this coalesces, that's going to help guide the direction of this project going forward. you know, um, one of my past plantations recently contacted me, and I've been fumbling with what I'm going to do for work. I'm just in a transition phase right now. I got a lot of options, a lot of opportunities, but um, the last thing I want to do is live in a way that's inconsistent with the things I've been talking about for the past year and a half here, right? That's going to do something to me psychologically. So, I got their email and I've got two texts this morning. They must be really hurting. Uh, I'm really not interested. I feel like writing will be enough. We'll see. We'll see. My grades are in, and I'm elevated to a strong, a definite solid 3.0, and that's good. I was worried. I was down to a 2.99, and I was on the teetering on the edge, and it was a result of coming back to college after a lot of changes. And so, I was worried about that. My GPA, I had an option to take. They had a new grading policy. I think it was nationwide. This pass fail thing, but it would have kept my GPA as it was, and that 2.99 it just doesn't look good, right? But it's good, strong 3.0. Let's see if we can support that a little more with these last three classes I have coming up in the fall. Oh, day 356. Last thing, real quick, just want to muse. I'm going to do a big block of these today as we wind down. Is this project? I'm glad I got into this work because it's uncovered things, and then like handling the information has enabled me to look beyond it. Not a big leap, but beyond it to think about some things Dr. Anderson may have wanted to add or may not have thought of at the time that he wrote some of his material or made videos and stuff, and that's natural, right? There's a growth, there's an arc in everything, and there's a few things that we've come across over this year and a half where I'm like, I would have adjusted this or fine tuned this. And the latest thing that's come up as we're wrapping this project up is that to reimagine, redefine America's relationship with slavery, that whole everything, redefine it as purely a crime. It's a you know it's a violation of human beings, right? And not so much put it into forced labor and all the details of slavery that we can argue about, and I've got plenty of videos on some of the details of slavery, but put it all, let's wrap it up, package it all up into a real crime, just, a real offense, all right, and then I think that really changes the argument. I've never heard slavery defined as a crime, you know, not just that um, the little nuts and bolts of kidnapping, forced labor, um, uncompensated labor, and all the intricacies. We've got rape, murder, yeah, all the stuff, but all of it it's a big crime, you know. This nation and many other nations are criminals if they have taken human flesh and manipulated it, you know, without consent. It's amazing the there's a whole rainbow of laws that this country is willing to march for today, and all this stuff. And uh, my 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 argument with that is, were people any more different socially, in a value system back then than they are now, right? Was that period in American history an example of human beings with lesser abilities, with no filter on how to rightly apply values? I think not, right? Well, human beings, you go talk to some anthropologists, us Homo sapiens, um, we're pretty recent on, when you think about how long we've been around in creation, yet we have great cognitive ability, or we have excellent values, right? Planet wide, you know. Um, so this slavery issue, when you look at it, America has gotten away. Of course, not the only time, first time probably, but it's really gotten away with a crime against humanity in what it enacted against a very specific group, right? I mean, America, I mean, it's so hypocritical. Like, oh, you look at some of the what we define as hate crime, right? Hate crime is, you are inflicting some, uh, you know, um, you're physically threatening a person because of their color, gender, sex, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, right? And then, oh boy, we know to call it a hate crime and stuff like that. Well, we need to look at some retroactive hate crime in this country. It's a crime for my plantation to be calling me up. When I was there, I talked to so many people so that I would not be in this position where they'd have to call me. But they just let it die off, let me walk off and stuff, and you know, and so now recruitment is back at me. You know, it's a crime to treat people like that across the board. This country is just, oh, you're expendable. Let's use you up, and then um, later on we'll put money aside, we'll put land aside, and endowments and things like that. Uh, it's criminal, is what I want to get at. Just at the top of our segment today. And as I go forward with what I've learned over the past year and a half, the information I've handled, was able to present it, things like that. That's one of the things I understand about America. It's just a place where it seems to get away with crime after crime, right? And it packages it, manipulates these issues in such a way where there's a very select group that remains on top and profits from what's going on. It's a crime, and that's how I'm going to always reflect on America. Not a bad place, I like my freedoms and things, and I like how we treat women in America. You know, we had to enact a lot of laws, but yeah, at least we're not like the Middle East with some stringent religious thing. That's a real drag against women. Um, it's a crime, America, and I think America needs to now. If you go back in the books, talk about reparations and things like that. Well, first you need to hold America accountable for its crimes against humanity. I'm inspired to do this work by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. Read three of his works. A Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. Black Labor, White Wealth, Search for Power and Economic Justice. And Dr. Anderson's National Plan to Empower Black America, Powernomics. You can find Dr. Anderson at powernomics.com. Here on YouTube, he's an easy guy to track down. Behind me, you see the hashtag #US2 symbol. Go check them out. You find black women supporting one another, sharing resources, and things like that. Check out Black Enough, BLAGGNUF, for kind of a black Facebook experience. If you can't find your flavor or voice here on the World Wide Web, do what I did. Start your own little spot and grow from that position. If you got a business mind, Dr. Boyce Watkins at the Black Business School will help you out. TheBlackBusinessSchool.com. Another great guy, Tyrone Gregory, self-employed tax guy, give you more business information. You can hook up with him, LinkedIn and Twitter, find him. And finally, we're going to take, I think this is our last foray into Uncle Tom's Cabin. We've been through the entire text over our time here, but I've just parachuted in, checked in with some characters that really stood out to me, some situations. I encourage you to get the book and get an idea, the flavor, the reason why this is this project is so important. Today we're going to go back and revisit Cassey. If you remember Cassey, she was this is the last slave owner. We got three plantations through um, three specific plantations through Uncle Tom's Cabin. We got the Shelbys, kick it off, St. Clair's, where Eva, Tom almost got his freedom there. And then finally, he's in the deep South, Louisiana, and Simon Legree's plantation. Well, Simon Legree, he's just a brute white man, very hedonistic and stuff like that. Um, just a shabby guy, and um, his slaves are just expendable brutes that he works to death. Right? He's got some slave henchmen to help with the overseeing and to abuse the other disadvantaged slaves and whatnot. But Simon Legree, like a lot of slave masters, he buys his concubines, usually, mulatto, quadroon, octoroon, light-skinned woman. I think about some of our um, music stars, Beyonce, complexion, Alicia Keys, these women, very attractive. They have um, the mix of a white and black person. Now in the slavery times, it was a white male slave master having sexual relations with his black female slaves. I mean, it's the epitome of power and control and rape back in those days. That female had no rights or say or anything. So, but anyway, the product of these unions were still slaves, right? They were light-skinned black people, right? So they couldn't participate in white privilege and stuff like that. They weren't dark-skinned white people, that's one thing I was become sensitive to the language when we speak about the identity of these men and women who are result of these unions. They never. You got all these mulattoes and quadroons running around uh, being slaves, but it was the thing you could tell through Harriet Beecher Stowe's book. She's in the mid 1800s, and you don't talk openly about it. So she's doing a lot of verbal jujitsu around rape that's going on in America at that time, sanctioned, and the privilege, power, control. I used to work with interpersonal violence, and so I've got some my own education around stalking, rape, domestic violence, those things like that. Well, this is definitely in that wheelhouse, is Cassey's experience. Anyway, Simon Legree, he's bought Cassey, and he's used her up. Actually, she's getting older. When we meet her, she's been disobedient, right, to Simon Legree. So he's had her locked up and stuff, and now he's cooled off, and he puts her in the field. She's really a housewoman. She's there to be Legree's concubine, sexual person. But now she's older. She resists Legree, and Legree doesn't want to go through too much work and things like that. He could force her, but he's not. He doesn't want to have this wayward uh, kind of spirit in there. But they 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 have an unhealthy bond, and it's something that he's planted some seeds, and now he's reaping from that. Anyway, he has bought when he bought Tom, he bought another young, beautiful girl that he could train up. Now, most of these, I won't say well, most. I don't know the demographics. A lot of these women were brought up in a Christian way. They, uh, trained up, probably played an instrument. They were literate, could read, knew how to be in white communities and society, because they're very attractive. My first love was actually the young girl, and she had an overbite and all this stuff, but she just blew my mind for some reason when I was very young. Her mother was German, white woman, and her father was a military man. I grew up in a military town, so we were very mixed, interracial. Serious racism didn't show itself in my town a lot. We knew that's a fringe thing, and you weren't openly like that. You better stay back in the woods with that stuff. It was when I came out into America that I really started to feel it. But so her father's black military man. So these three models that were a result of that union. Very beautiful, very beautiful. So these women like Cassey, or have some theology. They're literate, might play an instrument, and all this. And very few. There's some stories in Harriet's book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Some of these women are fortunate that they'll get a white man who really is head over heels and stuff, but it was illegal to marry anyone that's considered black, identifies black, and all that. And there's one drop rules and things like that that declared a person black. So there were laws in the United States, no mixing, racial mixing, and stuff like that. So some of these men, if they had means, would buy that woman, take her to Europe, marry, and be they could live as man and wife. And sometimes they came back. Um, so in Cassie's case, she was trained up that way and all that. But some of these women fell prey to white men who loved the beauty and uh, the sexual pleasures and privileges of being a white man that could indulge in these relationships and then cast their woman aside, you know, even after having children with them, playing house, so to speak, right? So Cassie was a victim of this, and with that, the guy, some of the men would give her a lot of false hopes about marriage or at least commitment and stuff, had children with her, and she fell in with one particular guy. She's starting to get passed around a little bit, and her children are now starting to be used as pawns uh, for her to be submissive and compliant in these relationships, and so she'd get with these guys, and right before she was sold to Simon Legree, her last master would always dangle selling her children over her head and stuff like that. And at this time, her children, I guess, were getting a little older, preteen. They were starting to function, maybe participate, maybe out in the field, or you know, they were starting to reach some of the ages, some challenging ages, right? Which is kind of dangerous for a slave uh, to go through some wayward teenage years, right? You remember you're a teenager, you knew it all, could beat the world, you had strength, you could stay up for days at a time and stuff like that. Not all teenagers, but I was one, right? Wayward and stuff like that. Anyway, so her children are starting to come, I think, of those ages. Um, Prepubescent, maybe. Anyway, there's Harriet Beecher Stowe tells us, in Cassie's story, that her son is a little obstinate, hard to control, things like that. And Cassey, she's trying to hold on. Her master is threatening to sell the children if Cassey isn't compliant and all this. And a lot of confusion goes on where eventually Cassie's young son he gets broke in, so to speak, and it drives Cassey insane and things like that are really is troubling, right? Because the slave masters, they justified dehumanizing the slaves by believing falsely. I think it was bad faith, believing that the slaves had no more interest in family values, than farm animals, right? You take a farm animal away from its mother, in maybe a short amount of time, the animals kind of go on. They feel it, but they go on. And so, white culture, would put that same type of, justify splitting up slave families with that thinking. Um, Eventually, it happens. Her young son, gets broken. Was its first beatings begin, actually, because you don't want that free spirit there on the plantation. So she has to watch and listen to her son go through that. Eventually, they they do an old trick with the slaves, where when they want to separate the family or sell off the children, often the slave master would send the slave out into the field, into town, distract them or whatever, and then behind their back sell off the children. And that's what happened with Cassey. It's an important part. Harriet Beecher Stowe, if you look at some of the architecture of her story, she's actually introducing us, I think, to Eliza's mother. Remember Eliza, little Harry, and then George and the other plantation, that right in the first chapter or so of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Well, the story wraps around, and they reunite in Canada, happily ever after and whatnot. But she goes through some years, some very challenging years. She's not as messed up as Prue. Remember, Prue had to listen to her baby starve to death, became an alcoholic, ended up being beaten to death by one of her later masters. Cassey at least holds it together a little better. She lives, right? So her last master is Simon Legree, this hedonistic white brute, and that's where she meets Tom, and Tom, of course, being the good Christian lover of God, things like that, tries to soothe her with this talk, and he's preaching to the choir, but this Cassie's disillusioned, right? Because she believed, good book, she had the training, she saw it working for white people, and all. That's another big lesson to come away from as we wrap up this project, how energy, the energy I put in as a black man in this system gets received and used in a whole lot different ways than white people in the system. And now that my eyes are open, I mean, it's a total cross section, spiritually, politically, economically. We've touched on so many things where there's this difference in American society for how black people get along and how white people get along. It's written down in the Constitution, right? You got all these little amendments and tidbits because America is treating black people different than white people. It's a cultural norm. We're so immersed in it. We think we are so equal and being competitive in the system and all, and it's all crap. Uh, Cassey, she says, she wishes she had poisoned her son with laudanum than let him live. And apparently this was a little semi-common practice, because, you have this child, but the outlook is torture and rape and forced labor and stuff like that. So you did have women, occasionally getting a hold of some laudanum. I think it's a painkiller, opiate, and just overdosing your child. Not uncommon. And Cassie wishes she had done that with her son rather than see him get conditioned, those early stages of conditioning in the system. Uh, Uncle Tom's Cabin, I encourage you to read it if you have not. Hey, listen, I'm out of time. Don't want to hold you hostage. Day 356 out of the way is the countdown. Come back again. We'll see you next time. I'm Tomlin's Nyback for 365 days toward racial change. Bye bye.